Chris, you've given us a lot to debate, so let's talk about that, because in what, as Chris was saying, has become, it feels like this futile ritual. President Obama reiterated his call for stricter gun control after that mass shooting in San Bernardino. So are stricter laws the answer, or is there another solution? Here to debate this morning are CNN political commentator and op-ed columnist for the New York Times, Charles Blow, and CNN political commentator and host of the Ben Ferguson Show, Ben Ferguson. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here.
Morning.
Charles, California has the strictest gun laws in the country. We've learned all too often crazed madmen and shooters don't abide by gun control laws.
Right.
Why call for more?
Well, I mean, first I think you have to get a scope of the problem, right? So if you have upwards of 300 million weapons in this country, right? You have, in any given year, you have roughly 33,000 people who lose their lives to gun violence. About a third of those are homicide. The other 2/3 are suicides, which is its own issue.
Absolutely.
But if you just take those numbers, you realize that a fraction of 1% of the guns, even if every kind of death was a separate gun, which is not because we have so many mass shootings, it's a fraction of 1% of the people, of those guns that are being used in a bad way. So we see most people, not most, just like overwhelming majorities of these guns are not being used in any bad way. So we want to encourage people to continue to do right by the guns that they have.
Right.
So I mean,
why would the president call for more laws then?
Because this is the thing. What we realize is that it only takes a tiny fraction, because we have so many, it only takes a tiny fraction of them to be used in the wrong way in order for them to wreak havoc on a community. So we have to then decide, how do we get to those few guns that are being used in a bad way to be out of those hands? And I think that there are things that are happening there there are proposals on the table that could help in that regard.
Okay.
So Ben,
hold those thoughts.
Want to get your take, because the fact is clearly something is not working here. If, as Chris was saying, this is the 355th mass shooting, and that means 4 people or more shot in an incident this year. Something's not working. We have to fix it.
I agree, but when the president comes out yesterday, before there had even been one single press conference, and pushes a false narrative that if you would just do gun control laws, somehow this would have not happened, that is about as unrealistic as him coming out claiming that this was probably going to be Muslim terrorists that accomplished this. We didn't know anything when he was pushing for gun control. We had no idea who the people were. We had no idea what guns were being used. We had no idea how many guns were used, and we didn't know if they were bought legally or illegally. We didn't know if we were dealing with convicted felons. So for him to come out and push gun control before he knew anything, before any of us knew anything about the guns even used, I'm sorry, it's irresponsible. Now here's the other thing. We want to think that if we pass a law that somehow this would have stopped what happened in California. Let's look at what happened in Paris. Paris has some of the most strict gun control laws in the world, and yet the people there were able to get these AK-47s in a place where they're illegal and you cannot buy them.
Listen,
and they were able to use them.
Right, you
so
both
I would
spelled
say
out
this
the
to the president.
I mean, perfectly.
But let me say this.
You go, quickly.
What law would the President of the United States of America pass? And I will say this to Charles. What law would you have passed yesterday to somehow stop this shooting? If we're going to blame guns for this, instead of looking at the facts of the person and where they were and where they were traveling and where they got married and where they came back and all the other flags around them, tell me what law you would have passed that would have made this not happen. I don't think there is a law.
Okay, Charles, so you were saying that you do think that there are some solutions.
Right,
Go ahead.
right. So I think that is always the wrong question. It is always the question that people ask who are advocating for no laws at all, right? Which is to say, what would you do in this particular case that would have stopped this particular crime? There's often not an answer to that question directly. What I think you have to do is...
Then why did the president push for it?
I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
Hold on.
Don't do that. So what you have to say is, this is unacceptable, right?
Everybody says that.
The level we have is unacceptable.
Yes.
How do we start to whittle away at the numbers? You're not going to solve them all.
Yes, right, of course.
You're not going to solve them all. You just want to start inching down.
If
you get 10, so you start with the idea that, number one, most Americans, overwhelming majority of Americans, agree that we should have universal background checks. 40% of all weapons are acquired without a background check in this country. That's a lot of different ways, right? So some of it's off-market sales,
Yes.
but also it's like intergenerational transfers, just transfers. You know,
Right.
your uncle gives you your first gun
And
when
we
you're
don't know
12.
yet with
because
this
you're
gun
hunting,
how it
you know.
worked, if it was legally. We believe it was
right.
legal.
So there are a lot of ways.
Okay, let me get Ben in. Go ahead, Ben.
You're dealing, again, would background checks have had any impact on this attack in California? The answer is no. You had two individuals that apparently were not convicted felons who bought a gun legally. Two of the guns were bought legally. The other two guns that he did not purchase, or they did not purchase, came from somebody else. How would you have stopped that? Whether they were, we don't even know if they're stolen at this point. We don't know if he let them borrow them. We have no idea around that. So if you want to push gun control, then push it, but at least be honest, saying, I don't like these guns. I don't want anybody to have them. I don't
You're talking
want
to the
them
wrong
out there on
person
the
about
streets.
who doesn't like
Let's not
guns.
act as if.
First of all, you're talking to the wrong
This would have
dude.
stopped
You're
what
talking to the
happened
wrong dude.
yesterday.
Yeah.
I grew
No
up
one's
with,
saying that, Ben.
guns. I grew up with guns. We slept under our gun racks over our beds.
Right.
I grew up in a rural part of America.
You're saying there's a responsible way to do
Let me
it.
just make sure you
Go.
understand. Don't ever do that. Don't ever just try to assume that people who want some level of gun control don't have any idea of what guns are, never owned a gun. That is not me.
I think President Obama yesterday
let me finish this.
No, you interrupted me.
No, I'm going to
say
finish.
this.
I am going to finish.
President
No, you're
Obama-
not
Hold
going
on,
to
give
finish.
us one more
Obama
sentence,
called-
I am
Ben.
going to
Hold on,
finish.
Ben. Go ahead.
I
Go
am
ahead,
going
Charles.
to finish.
Quickly.
My brother is also, he sells guns. He's a gun collector. He deals in vintage guns, but he goes to gun shows. He sees this up close, this idea of like people who can buy and sell without any sort of background check. That's actually not what we want. And I think what we have to do is, in the long view, is say, most people are really responsible gun owners. We want to make sure that we keep all of the guns, or more of the guns, in the hands of really responsible people and not in the hands of people who are not. And don't try to pitch people who want some level of gun control as just being, oh, I hate guns. That's crazy.
Ben, we just have a few seconds.
What I'm saying-
Quickly, Ben.
What I'm saying is this. President Obama yesterday does not, it's very obvious when you come out and push that gun control somehow would have made us safe yesterday, when in the reality was we have no idea how gun control being passed would affect any of this. The same way in Paris. They have extreme gun control and it did not save those people's lives. If you're a terrorist, domestic or connected to ISIS or Al Qaeda, to imply that if we pass this law, somehow this is going to change is incredibly unrealistic looking at the situation. Here's the other thing. If you're a law-abiding citizen, up to the point of yesterday, which it appears this guy was like, why would a gun law have stopped him from doing this when we know he could buy guns legally?
Right. We hear your point, Charles. Ben,
Status quo,
thank you so
talking
much.
points.
We will obviously be debating this and dealing with this throughout the program and for days to come.
Indicative
Sadly.
of the passion on all sides of this.